Robert Geiger, a press reporter on April 15, 1935, coined the line, "Three little words achingly familiar on a Western farmer's tongue rule life in the Dust Bowl of the continent. If it rains." It never did, and that was the start of the Dust Bowl, a phenomenon of the 1930s, also commonly referred to as the Dirty 30s, which was understandable considering the dirty, dusty, harsh living conditions that they had to fight through. Many were affected by this disaster, as these storms practically consumed the states of Oklahoma and Texas, but also affecting some of the surrounding states such as Kansas, Colorado, and even some of New Mexico. These storms, called black blizzards, were often caused from a mixture of little rain, light soil, and high winds. These were terrible conditions, but it was a butterfly effect, really. The drought and heavily worked soil produced small, dry soil particles, which in turn did nothing to help with the heavy winds that soon followed. Many Dust Bowl residents who inhaled the airborne dust suffered from shortness of breath, asthma, coughing fits, and bronchitis. Many people also contracted dust pneumonia. During this time, it may have been referred to as the brown plague. These illnesses impacted hundreds. Just alone, nearly 500 infants, children, and elderly contracted these diseases because of their higher susceptibility. The Dust Bowl leaving approximately 500,000 homeless and 2.5 million moving completely out of the state. The largest impact it had, though, was on the livestock. The livestock if it was even lucky enough to survive, it would be bought to feed the homeless living in Hoovervilles. Sick cattle being purchased for $1 and the healthy for upwards of $16. My point is that this was a devastating time period, ruining, affecting, and taking the lives of many people and animals. This flashback to an American history class that I just brought you through was to make and prove my point of the importance of farm practices, such as irrigation, crop rotation, and cover crops. If each of these methods had been implemented in every aspect, the Dust Bowl could have been prevented. It could have saved lives and ultimately prevented the hardships and stress the country was put under. Rain follows the plow was the status quo, so labor was plentiful. Then drought struck, lasting from 1934 to 1937. These states had little to no form of precipitation for 3 years. Dated back to almost as early as 300 AD, the Hohokam are recognized for being one of the first to build a large-scale irrigation system, made from rawhide and basket tools. This version not being nearly as high-tech and innovative as today, but rather simple, and it worked. They maintained thousands of acres for centuries under this idea of irrigation. Even a simple makeshift irrigation system could have helped during the 1930s, and not prevented but assisted tremendously to the conditions. The grounds were overworked with the new development of tractors and farm machinery. Fields were being planted year after year with the same crops. Unfortunately, the same crops means the same root systems year after year. So if you plant a crop one year and it has a shallow root system, the next year you're planting the same crop and it's going to have that same root structure. So the same form of growth is taking place. Charles Townshend from the 18th century realized that this could result with problems in the future. The Dust Bowl residents didn't realize this. Since drought was taking place, they planted shallow-rooted crops in hopes of absorbing any rainwater that had fallen during that time, which on the surface makes a lot of sense, but proved to be fatal during these conditions. A method was developed to help with these issues. Charles Townshend developed the first 4-field crop rotation. Amongst 4 fields, 4 crops were planted, changing yearly. This provided the farmers with durable, nutrient-filled soil that wouldn't scatter in the wind, unlike the soils of the Dust Bowl. The implementation of a crop rotation would have fabricated stronger soil to withstand the powerful winds. Winds up to 60 miles an hour wreaked havoc on the already poor conditions, picking up lighter sand and dust, sliding it across the nation, causing friction to build and more soil to be picked up. There were days that it was just pitch black. They thought, like roosters, I read that roosters and chickens were roosting early because they thought it was nighttime and it was in the middle of the day. These storms were just astronomical in how much sand they were picking up, and they were just drowning out the sun that was there, baking the fields, causing more sand to be dried and picked up. Some of these storms blacked out the brightest of days. The wind, unfortunately, continued to blow and dried the land even more. A cover crop was absolutely necessary. When the Great Depression hit during the 1930s, the demand for wheat plummeted. Nobody had any money to buy wheat, or any food for that matter. Then the amber waves of grain ceased to exist. They all dried up, turning into barren dust fields, leaving the plains defenseless to these relentless winds. The wheat acted as an anchor, holding the soil firm and solid while entangled in its root structures. A cover crop should have been used to constantly have structure below the surface. Each one of these practices needed the next. Without cover crops, there was no need for crop rotation, and without irrigation and water, none of these practices would have been possible. This wasn't something that you could fly by the seat of your pants on. It was a way of life, and these needed to be in effect long before trouble arose. That's why we use these methods now, to prevent disaster. As I live and breathe working on a family farm, we have the weight of the world on our shoulders, literally. We sustain the world. That's no farms, no food. That's how it works. We don't want a Dust Bowl Part 2, but in some ways, it was a learning experience. Now we know what we need to do to prevent these things from happening again, and I can tell you what we need to do to stop it from happening again. So we study and improve. Within the Future Farmers of America creed, it states, in the promise of better days through better ways, even as the better things that we now enjoy have come to us from the struggle of former years. And agriculture was built on this. I think it's important as agriculturalists and as bystanders, we see where some of these things come into play, and we see how we can prevent them, not just in farming and in agriculture, but in everything. You see, they talk about how a smart man learns from his mistakes, and a wise man learns from others' mistakes, and that's just how it works sometimes. So that is my speech. Thank you.
That's it. That is good.
All right, well, we're not done yet.